Acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, the Turrbal and the Yagara people, I pay my respects to elders and would like to begin with a story. A story of the person who has had the greatest influence on my life. My Nana is what I affectionately called my grandfather in Hindi. I was born into an apartheid government in South Africa, a fifth-generation South African Indian. In the 1800s, my family moved from India as indentured labor for the cane fields in Durban. My great-great-great-grandfather and two brothers jumped ship as it pulled into Port Natal, swam in secrecy to shore, and began their respective businesses, a shoe stall, a fruit stall, and a jewelry stall. My Nana started a dry cleaning business. I remember learning the word entrepreneur sitting in class in grade 4, and knowing then it was something I wanted to become. See, my Nana was an entrepreneur, although he would never call himself that. He raised the capital, bought the machinery, and started South Africa's first dry cleaning service that catered to non-whites, which is how South Africa classed the majority of its population. Unlike his competitors, my Nana's business focused on ensuring accessible laundry service to most of the working class by picking up and dropping off laundry to their homes, thereby enabling a greater portion of the population to now access regular laundered clothes. My Nana's business grew to over 70 fleets, and when the apartheid government decided to build a road through half of his warehouse with no compensation, he simply continued by efficiently using the half remaining. At my Nana's funeral, over 1,500 people came to pay their respects. It was on this day that I learned the full story about my Nana's business, as stranger after stranger stood up to speak about how my Nana's business had provided their family with a scholarship to attend university, had employed marginalized communities, or provided the needed funds for makeshift schools for non-whites. Today, my Nana would be called a social entrepreneur, although he would never call himself that either. He was and had always maintained that he was a family man, and these communities and environments in which his business operated were his family. My Nana's story motivated me to complete my economic honors on the social entrepreneur. It gave me the courage to quit my corporate job at Australia's leading economic advisory firm to found my own social enterprises. And it gives me the determination to continue to see business as this tool for social value creation. So, who here has heard of social enterprise? Please raise your hands. Great, most of you have. And if you haven't, don't worry, because the reality is there is no defined political, social, or economic understanding of a social enterprise. I'm going to explain it as it sits in our current economy. We can understand our economy as this spectrum, with traditional charity on one side and traditional business on the other. In a traditional charity setting, we have a model that relies on grants and fundings to achieve a social mission and has no shareholders. And on the other extreme, in a traditional business setting, we have a business that sells goods or services to achieve a profit mission and has many shareholders. A step in from a traditional business is what we have that's called corporate social responsibility. It's when a business decides to strategically, or is mandated, to put some of its profits towards a social cause. This could look like allowing employees to volunteer on work days for social causes, or putting a percentage of profits towards social aims. And a step in from traditional charity is those charities with a sales arm, for example, selling merchandise or ticketed events to raise funds for a social cause. And all along the spectrum is what we call social enterprise. It could be set up as a charity model or a business model, but what it has in common is one thing. It includes the third person in its business or charity model. In reality, we rarely see traditional models of charity or business. Most enterprises seem to be a mix of profit or purpose. So, how do we, as the everyday consumer, in deciding where to put our hard-earned dollars to reflect the values we may hold of ethical, responsible, environmentally sustainable values, decide where to put those hard-earned dollars, especially without falling into greenwashing, pinkwashing, or other forms of brand activism? Well, have I got a handy rule of thumb for you the next time you're shopping? You simply have to ask, does this business or charity include the third person in their business model? Let me explain. And I'm about to get a little nerdy here, so bear with me. In an episode of The Simpsons, Bart Simpson goes fishing at the local river near Mr. Burns' nuclear energy power plant, and he catches Blinky, the three-eyed fish. Blinky is a result of the pollution that Mr. Burns' nuclear energy power plant is pouring into the river. I buy power from Mr. Burns, and in exchange, I pay money for this power. However, the price I pay for the power does not factor in the cost of pollution to Bart or Blinky. I do not think of the third person, and neither does Mr. Burns. We don't factor in the environmental and community costs in our transaction. In economics, this is known as a market failure, where the true cost or benefit of buying or selling a good or service is not reflected in the market transaction. This can include the negative costs such as pollution, privacy infringement, slave labor. It can also include positive benefits such as vaccination, bee pollination, or cycling to work. Put simply, market failures occur when we don't include the third person in our market transactions. Governments try to regulate this market failure by the outright banning or prohibition of certain goods or services, or they introduce regulatory schemes like carbon credits. Charities try to lobby government or plant the trees once the forest is destroyed, and corporate social responsibility puts profits towards these social aims, but that's after their profit is made. This is what a social enterprise model differentiates from these other types of models and what sets them apart. They include the third person in their business model. What this looks like practically is asking, who is in my supply chains? Are they ethical? Who is being employed? What is being done with profit? And is environmental impacts being measured and accounted for? Put simply again, when a business or charity model includes the third person, we see a direct link between the growth of that business or charity to the reduction of social value problems. One of my modern examples is Patagonia, whose commitment to environmentally sustainable production processes means that the growth of their outdoor apparel is linked to the reduction of environmentally harmful production processes. And one of my favorite examples is from the 1970s, from a company called Interface. The CEO at the time was so inspired by environmental sustainability that in providing the tiled carpets for large spaces, he wanted to ensure that the water coming out of his factories was as clean, if not cleaner, than the water coming in. He included the third person, the impacts that water would go on to have in the communities and environments that his factories operated in. In reality, most of us move in this market dynamic. There's me, and I buy goods and services in exchange for money. However, this form of thinking is outdated. It parallels a black and white narrative of thinking of traditional charity and traditional business, when in reality, we know our transactions in the market and where we put our dollars and with whom has impacts on third parties at every step of the way. What I'm sharing with you is not new knowledge. We have lived in community groups for millennia. What I'm asking you to do is return to a community-minded way of thinking. As you move as a consumer through our economy, think, where does my purchasing power impact the third person? For me, it's become really simple. When I'm thinking of my purchasing power and seeing every dollar as a vote to reflect my values, I simply ask, does this business or charity include the third person? Knowing then that the growth of that business or charity will be linked to the reduction of social problems in our society. More and more of us are thinking in this way, with Gen Z and millennials leading the charge by letting their wallets do the talking and actively choosing to work or buy from companies that reflect their values. As we move through our economy, valuing goods and services in this way, we become valued in return. And I bet there have been times where you have been that third person, as I have, and wish that someone had thought of us. Together, let's include the third person.